The chains around my wrists were still warm from the crash when the guards dragged me into the arena tunnel. I did not know the name of this planet yet. I only knew that my ship was scrap metal buried in a crater 3 miles from where I now stood, and that the beings holding me were nearly 7 feet tall, with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed faint amber in the dark. "Human," one of them said, testing the word like it tasted strange in his mouth. "You will fight today." I laughed, because what else could I do? My name is Ethan Cole, and 2 hours earlier I had been running diagnostics on a failing engine core, trying to keep myself alive long enough to find a friendly signal. Now I was being told I would fight something, for reasons nobody had bothered to explain. Fight who? I asked. Fight what? The guard did not answer. He shoved me forward, through a stone archway, into blinding light and the roar of a crowd that sounded like the ocean during a storm. The arena was enormous, carved from black rock, ringed with thousands of alien faces staring down at me. I had seen holovids of gladiator pits back on Earth history channels, dramatized nonsense for children. This was not that. This was real stone-stained dark in places I did not want to think about, and real weapons racked along the walls, and a real crowd that had come to watch someone bleed. Someone pressed a short, curved blade into my hand. I barely had time to feel its weight before a horn sounded, low and heavy, shaking dust from the ceiling. Across the sand, a door opened, and my opponent stepped out. He was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with dark-plated skin and 4 arms, each one ending in a hand built for crushing rather than holding. He looked at me the way a man might look at an insect that had wandered onto his dinner plate. Mild curiosity, no fear at all. I heard laughter ripple through the crowd. Somewhere above me, in a section draped with deep red cloth, I caught a flash of gold and violet, a figure seated on a high balcony, watching everything with sharp, careful eyes. I did not know yet that I was looking at the princess of this world. I only knew that she was watching me the way you watch something you expect to lose. I decided right then that I did not want to lose. The 4-armed giant came at me fast for something his size, faster than I expected, and I barely rolled aside as one massive fist cratered the sand where I had been standing. I had trained in close combat back in my old unit. Nothing fancy, mostly survival basics, but survival basics were suddenly the only thing keeping me alive. I stayed low. I stayed moving. Every time he swung, I let him miss by inches, because inches were all I needed, and every miss cost him balance he could not easily recover, with 4 arms working against each other instead of together. He was strong, stronger than anything I had ever faced, but strength without rhythm is just wasted effort, and I was very good at making things about rhythm. The crowd noise shifted. It was no longer pure mockery. There was a new sound threading through it now, sharp and curious, the sound of a crowd realizing the insect might actually bite. I found my opening when he overextended on a downward strike, his lower arms too slow to correct the swing. I drove forward, inside his guard, and used the hilt of my blade against the joint behind his knee, not to wound deeply, but to buy space, to make him stagger. He did stagger, and the crowd gasped, and for one heartbeat the entire arena went silent enough that I could hear my own breathing. Then he came at me again, angrier now, and I understood something important. I could not win this by matching his strength. I had to make him tired. I had to make him make mistakes, so I ran, not away from the fight, but around it, circling, forcing him to turn his heavy frame again and again, bleeding his energy in slow, steady amounts while I conserved mine. It worked. By the 5th minute, he was breathing hard. By the 7th, his strikes had lost their crushing certainty. I found my second opening and took it, disarming one of his lower hands with a strike that made the weapon clatter uselessly onto the sand. The crowd roared again, differently this time, and I risked a glance up toward the red balcony. She was leaning forward now, both hands gripping the railing, gold and violet robes catching the arena light. She was not laughing anymore either. The giant, humiliated and furious, made one final desperate charge, throwing caution away entirely. I sidestepped, let his own momentum carry him past me, and pressed the flat of my blade against the side of his neck, a gesture I somehow understood, from instinct or from something in the air itself, meant submission rather than death. The horn sounded again, this time high and triumphant. I had won. The guards who dragged me from the sand afterward were far gentler than the ones who had thrown me in. They looked at me differently now, with something between confusion and respect. I was taken not back to a cell, but to a chamber, with actual furniture, actual water, actual bandages for the shallow cut along my forearm that I had not even noticed until the adrenaline faded. That was where I first met her properly. The doors opened without a knock, and she walked in like she owned the room, which, I would soon learn, she very nearly did. "You fought well, for a creature no one has ever heard of," she said. Her voice was smooth, layered with an accent that made every word sound deliberate. Up close, she was strikingly beautiful in an alien way, sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of dark amber, hair the deep violet of dusk. "I am Elira. This is my world you crashed into, human." "Ethan," I said, "Ethan Cole, and I'd love an explanation for why I was handed a knife and pushed into a pit." Elira studied me for a long moment before answering. "Because on this world, strength decides everything. Rank, land, marriage, succession. My people do not vote for leaders, Ethan Cole. We test them, and right now, my claim to the throne is being tested by rivals who think I am too soft to rule. So you needed someone to fight for you." "I needed someone unpredictable," she corrected. "My rivals have studied every warrior on this world. They know how we move, how we think, what tricks we favor. You are nothing they have ever seen. You could be the advantage I need." I should have said no. I should have demanded a way home, a translator, anything resembling due process. But I had just survived a fight I had no business surviving. Adrenaline was still burning through my veins, and there was something in the way she looked at me, not with pity, not with mockery, but with genuine calculation, that made me curious rather than afraid. "And if I fight for you," I said, "what happens to me? You live in comfort, you are protected, and if we succeed, you will have earned a place of honor in my court." She paused. "If we fail, it will not matter, because we will both likely be dead." "Comforting," I muttered. "I did not say it would be safe. I said it would matter." There was something almost hypnotic about her certainty, the way she spoke about danger, like it was simply weather to be endured, rather than avoided. I thought about the ship I would probably never fully repair, the crater 3 miles away, the fact that no rescue signal I sent was likely to reach anyone who cared. I thought about the 4-armed giant I had just defeated, and the strange electric feeling of having done something that should have been impossible. "All right," I said finally, "I'll fight for you, but I want answers, real ones. Who are your rivals? Why does this matter so much? And who was watching from the balcony behind yours, the one with the crown?" Something flickered across Elira's face at that last question, quick and guarded. "That is my mother," she said carefully. "The Queen. She rules this empire, and she watches everything that happens in this arena very closely." "Is she on your side?" Elira's expression did not change, but her voice grew quieter. "My mother is on whichever side benefits her most. Right now I am simply hoping that side happens to be mine." I did not understand yet how much weight was hiding inside that sentence. I did not understand that the Queen had already noticed me, had already begun turning me over in her mind like a piece on a game board only she could see the full shape of. All I knew, standing in that chamber with my wound freshly bandaged and my future completely unwritten, was that I had just agreed to fight in wars I did not understand, for a princess I had known less than an hour, on a planet that was not going to let me leave quietly. Outside the chamber, distant horns sounded again, calling the next challenger into the arena, and somewhere far above us, in a room draped with gold, I imagined amber eyes narrowing with interest, already deciding exactly how useful I might become. I had no idea yet how right that imagination would turn out to be. 3 days after my first fight, I learned that winning once meant nothing on this world. It only meant I was now worth watching. Illyra kept me close during those days, not out of affection but out of necessity. Her rivals for the throne had grown bold the moment word spread that a strange small creature had defeated one of their finest warriors. They began sending challenges almost daily, each one wrapped in formal language but meaning the same simple thing: prove your champion is not a fluke, or lose everything. My second fight came against a woman named Draza, a warrior with skin the color of storm clouds and twin blades that moved faster than anything I had faced before. She fought nothing like the giant had. She was precise, economical, terrifyingly controlled. I remember standing across from her in the arena, sweat already gathering at the back of my neck, thinking that speed like that could not be outrun. So I did not try to outrun it. I let her come to me, and instead of dodging wide the way I had before, I dodged small, tight movements meant to conserve energy rather than waste it. She was fast, but she also expected fear, expected me to retreat, and every time I did not retreat, I saw a flicker of hesitation cross her face. Hesitation, on this world, was an opening. I used everything I had. I used the terrain, kicking sand toward her eyes at exactly the wrong moment for her. I used misdirection, feinting toward her weaker side before pivoting hard toward her stronger one. I used sheer stubbornness, absorbing a shallow cut along my ribs without losing my footing, because losing my footing meant losing everything. When it ended, Draza was on one knee, her twin blades knocked from her hands, and I was standing over her with my chest heaving, barely believing I had survived. The crowd's reaction this time was different from before. There was no laughter at all, just a low, rolling murmur of disbelief, thousands of voices trying to decide what they had just witnessed. Illyra met me afterward with something close to genuine warmth in her eyes. "You continue to surprise me," she said, helping me toward the healer's chamber herself, instead of sending a servant. "I'm starting to surprise myself," I admitted. "The court is speaking of nothing else. They call you the small storm. Some of my rivals are furious. Others are curious enough to want you for themselves." She paused, glancing toward the high balcony where once again her mother sat watching in silence. "And my mother has asked to see you." My stomach tightened at that. Something about the way Illyra said it, careful, guarded, told me this was not a simple courtesy. "When?" I asked. "Tonight." The summons came exactly as she said it would, delivered by two guards in deep gold armor, far more ornate than any I had seen before. They led me not to a chamber like Illyra's, but to an entire wing of the palace that felt colder, quieter, and more deliberately impressive, as if every stone had been placed specifically to remind visitors how small they were. The queen's throne room was vast, lit by strange floating lights that cast everything in a soft amber glow. She sat upon a throne carved from black stone veined with gold, and even seated, she seemed taller than anyone I had met on this world. Her eyes, the same amber as her daughter's, studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "So," she said, her voice deep and unhurried, "this is the creature that has my court in an uproar." "Ethan Cole," I said, bowing slightly, uncertain of the correct protocol, but unwilling to risk offense. "I know your name, human. I know a great deal about you already." She rose from her throne and descended the steps slowly, circling me the way a predator circles something it has not yet decided is prey or partner. "I know you crashed on my world with a failing ship and no allies. I know you defeated two of our finest warriors within days of arriving. I know my daughter believes she has found her salvation in you." "And what do you believe?" I asked, surprising myself with the boldness of the question. The queen's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "I believe potential is a dangerous thing to waste. And I believe you do not yet understand what you have stumbled into." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Everyone keeps giving me half of the story." She studied me a moment longer before answering. "On this world, power is not inherited quietly. It is earned, tested, and constantly challenged. My daughter's claim to succeed me is far from guaranteed. She has enemies among the noble houses who believe her too gentle, too hesitant, to rule an empire that stretches across a dozen worlds. Every fight you win in her name strengthens her position. Every fight you lose weakens it beyond repair. So I'm a weapon in a political fight. You are more than that, the Queen said, and something in her tone shifted, quieter, more deliberate. There is an old law on this world, rarely invoked, nearly forgotten by most. A champion who wins enough trials on behalf of a royal does not simply serve that royal. Eventually, the crown itself may claim him. I felt a chill move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning that should your victories continue, human, it will not only be my daughter's fate tied to your blade, it will be mine as well. She stopped circling and stood directly before me, close enough that I could see flecks of deeper gold within her amber eyes. I have not decided yet what to do with that knowledge, but you should understand it now, before it becomes relevant. I did not know what to say. Every instinct I had told me this conversation carried far more weight than the simple words being exchanged. The Queen was not merely informing me. She was measuring me, deciding in real time whether I was a tool to be used or something else entirely. Why tell me this at all? I finally asked. Your daughter didn't mention any of it. Because my daughter does not yet fully understand it herself, the Queen said. And because I find it wiser to deal honestly with dangerous things, rather than let them discover their own danger by accident. She returned to her throne, seating herself with the same unhurried grace she had used to rise from it. You may go, Ethan Cole. But remember this conversation. The trials ahead will not grow easier. They will grow far more complicated, in ways that have very little to do with swords. I left that throne room with more questions than I had walked in with, and a strange, uncomfortable awareness settling over me. Alira had brought me into her world to survive a political struggle. The Queen, it seemed, was already several steps ahead, considering possibilities that stretched far beyond mere survival. Over the following week, I fought 2 more trials, each one harder than the last. I faced a warrior who fought with a weighted net, designed to trap rather than kill, forcing me to learn new patience, new patterns of movement. I faced a pair of brothers who fought together with terrifying coordination, forcing me to learn how to divide their attention against each other rather than fight them as a single unit. Each time, I won, though each victory left me more exhausted, more scarred, more aware of how thin the line was between triumph and disaster. Alira changed during those weeks as well. The careful distance she had kept at first began to soften into something more genuine. She sat with me some evenings, not discussing politics or trials, but simply talking, asking questions about Earth, about the ship I had lost, about the life I had left behind. I found myself looking forward to those conversations more than I probably should have. You fight like someone who has decided not to lose, she told me one evening as we sat together on a balcony overlooking the training grounds, not like someone who fights because he has to. Maybe I've just realized losing here means something worse than losing usually does, I said. She smiled, faint but real. Perhaps, or perhaps you simply enjoy proving people wrong. That too, I admitted. But even as those quiet moments grew more frequent, I could not shake the memory of the Queen's amber eyes, the careful weight in her voice when she spoke of ancient laws and champions being claimed by the crown itself. Something was shifting beneath the surface of this world, something larger than a single trial or a single rival, and I was beginning to understand that I stood at the center of it, whether I had chosen that position or not. The final trial before the grand tournament, the one that would decide whether Alira's claim to the throne survived at all, was announced with far more ceremony than any before it. Horns sounded through the entire palace. Nobles from every house gathered in the arena stands, their colors bright against the black stone, and high above it all, on her private balcony, the Queen watched with an expression I could not read, patient, calculating, waiting to see exactly what her daughter's strange human champion would become. I stood at the tunnel entrance that morning, blade in hand, heart steady despite everything, and thought about how far I had come from the wreckage of my ship only weeks before. I did not yet know that the true danger waiting for me had very little to do with the arena, and everything to do with the throne looming above it. The final trial arrived on a morning when the sky above the palace burned a strange shade of copper, a color the locals told me only appeared before events of great consequence. I did not need the sky to tell me that. I could feel it in the tension threading through every hallway, every guard, every servant who refused to meet my eyes as I passed. Alira found me in the training yard before dawn, already dressed in ceremonial armor that looked far too delicate for actual combat. She watched me work through my final preparations, running through footwork drills meant to keep my mind sharp rather than my body tired. "Today decides everything," she said quietly. "If you win, my claim stands unchallenged before the full council. If you lose, my rivals will use it as proof that I am unfit to rule, and there will be nothing left for me to appeal to." "No pressure then," I said, trying for lightness and mostly failing. She did not smile. "I need you to understand something, Ethan. Whatever happens today, I am grateful for what you have already done. You did not have to fight for me. You were a stranger, thrown into my world's cruelty with no warning and no choice. And still, you chose to stand beside me." "I didn't have many other options," I admitted, but somewhere along the way, that stopped being the reason. Something shifted in her expression, warmth breaking briefly through the composed mask she wore in public. Before she could respond, a horn sounded across the palace grounds, deep and resonant, calling every noble house to the arena. The arena itself had been transformed for the occasion. Where before the stands had held perhaps a few thousand spectators, now they overflowed with tens of thousands. Nobles and commoners packed shoulder to shoulder, banners from every house snapping in the wind. And above it all, higher than any other seat, the Queen's throne had been moved directly into the arena itself, positioned where she could see every angle of the fight to come. My opponent this time was not a single warrior, but three, chosen by the council of rival houses, specifically to end any doubt about my capabilities once and for all. I recognized none of them individually, but I recognized the look in their eyes immediately, calm, confident, utterly convinced that today would be the day the strange human champion finally fell. Alira stood beside her mother's throne as the rules were read aloud by a herald whose voice carried across the entire arena. I would face all three opponents simultaneously, with no breaks, no assistance, and no mercy extended in either direction. Victory meant Alira's claim to the throne stood confirmed before the entire empire. Defeat meant not only my own death, but the effective end of Alira's path to succession. I looked up at the Queen's throne one last time before the horn sounded. She was watching me with the same unreadable expression she always wore, amber eyes catching the copper light of the strange morning sky. I could not tell if she wanted me to win or simply wanted to see what I would become in the attempt. The horn sounded. The three warriors moved. I had faced difficult opponents before, but nothing had prepared me for the terrifying coordination of three trained fighters moving as a single unit. They surrounded me almost immediately, forcing me to abandon any strategy built around single combat. I had to think differently, move differently, survive differently. I used the arena itself as a weapon, ducking behind support pillars meant for decoration, using them to break their formation, to force them into positions where they had to choose between coordinating with each other or pressing their individual advantage. Every choice I forced upon them bought me seconds, and seconds were the only currency I had left to spend. The first exchange left a deep cut along my shoulder, sharp enough that I felt it more than saw it, blood soaking quickly through the fabric of my armor. I could not afford to acknowledge the pain. I kept moving, kept forcing separation, kept refusing to become an easy, stationary target. Minutes passed like hours. I do not remember every individual strike, every dodge, every desperate roll across the sand. I remember fragments. The sound of a blade whistling past my ear close enough to stir my hair. The taste of copper in my mouth from a blow that caught my jaw. The moment I finally managed to isolate the smallest of the three warriors from his companions and drove him to the ground with a combination of speed and sheer desperation that surprised even me. With one opponent down, the fight shifted. The remaining two grew more cautious, more aware that their earlier confidence had been misplaced. I used that caution against them, exaggerating my exhaustion, letting my movement slow just enough to invite a mistake. When the mistake came, a slightly overextended strike from the taller of the two, I seized it completely, disarming him with a technique I had learned defeating Draza weeks earlier, and driving him back with enough force to buy myself precious space. That left one warrior standing, the most dangerous of the three, a fighter whose control and precision reminded me uncomfortably of Draza at her sharpest. We circled each other for what felt like an eternity, both of us reading every twitch, every shift of weight, searching for the smallest opening. He found his opening first, a strike aimed directly at the wound, already bleeding along my shoulder, clearly meant to exploit weakness rather than simply win cleanly. I twisted at the last possible moment, taking the strike along my forearm instead, sacrificing new pain to protect the greater vulnerability. The movement left him slightly overextended, and I did not hesitate. I drove forward, inside his guard, using every ounce of strength I had left to press the flat of my blade against his throat, exactly as I had done during my very first fight in this arena weeks earlier. He froze. The horn sounded, high and triumphant, echoing across the stunned silence of the crowd. I had won. The arena erupted into a roar, unlike anything I had heard before, thousands of voices rising at once, some in celebration, others in disbelief, a few, undoubtedly belonging to Alira's rivals, in barely contained fury. I stood in the center of the sand, blood soaking through torn fabric in multiple places, chest heaving, barely able to process what had just happened. Alira rushed down from the royal platform before the guards could stop her, reaching me before the healers did, her hands gripping my uninjured arm as if she needed physical proof that I was still standing. "You did it," she said, voice shaking with an emotion I had not heard from her before. "Ethan, you actually did it." "Told you I don't like losing," I managed, though the words came out weaker than I intended. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across us both. I looked up to find the queen standing there, having descended from her elevated throne without any of the ceremony I expected. Up close, in the aftermath of battle, her presence felt even more overwhelming than it had in the quiet of her throne room. "You have done something remarkable today, human," she said, her voice carrying easily across the sudden hush that had fallen around us. "3 trained warriors, defeated by a single stranger from a world none of us had ever heard of before your arrival." "I had good reason to fight hard," I said, glancing briefly at Alira. Something flickered across the queen's expression at that glance, something sharp and considering that I did not fully understand in the moment. "Indeed," she said simply, "you should rest now. The healers will tend to your wounds. There is much to discuss in the days ahead, now that my daughter's claim stands confirmed before the Empire." She turned and walked away without further explanation, guards falling into formation around her, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than it should have, given the victory we had just secured. I spent the following days recovering in a chamber filled with healers and strange, glowing medical devices that eased pain in ways I did not fully understand but was grateful for regardless. Alira visited often, sometimes with reports on the political fallout of my victory, sometimes simply to sit with me in comfortable silence. Her rivals, humiliated by the outcome, had grown quieter, though I suspected quiet did not mean they had given up entirely. It was during one of those recovery days that a servant arrived with a message bearing the Queen's personal seal, requesting my presence in her private chambers as soon as the healers permitted travel. Alira read the message over my shoulder, and I noticed her expression tighten in a way I had not seen before. "What is it?" I asked. My mother rarely summons anyone to her private chambers, Illyra said carefully. It is unusual. Unusual how? Illyra hesitated, choosing her words with obvious care. There is a difference, Ethan, between the queen who sits upon the throne, weighing political advantage, and the queen who receives someone privately, without ceremony, without witnesses. I do not know which version of my mother you are about to meet, but I would advise caution, regardless. Her warning settled uncomfortably in my chest as I made my way, still favoring my injured shoulder, toward the private wing of the palace I had visited only once before. The guards there recognized me immediately, stepping aside without challenge, which felt somehow more unsettling than resistance would have. The queen's private chamber was nothing like her throne room. It was smaller, warmer, lit by soft golden light, rather than the imposing amber glow of the public spaces. She stood near a wide window overlooking the arena where I had fought only days earlier, her back to me as I entered. "You wished to see me," I said, unsure of the correct protocol for whatever this meeting actually was. "I did," she said, turning slowly to face me. Without the formal robes and elevated throne, she seemed less like a ruler and more like a woman carefully considering a decision that weighed on her more than she wished to admit. "You have exceeded every expectation I held for you, Ethan Cole. Few warriors on this world could have survived what you survived in that arena." "I had a good reason to survive," I said again, though this time, with only the queen present, the words felt heavier, more complicated. "Yes," she said softly, "my daughter." She studied me for a long moment, amber eyes searching mine with an intensity that made it difficult to look away. "Tell me honestly, human, do you believe your loyalty belongs entirely to her?" The question caught me completely off guard. I opened my mouth to answer immediately, instinctively, but something in her expression made me pause, made me actually consider the question rather than simply react to it. "I fought for her," I said slowly. "I still would, but I'm starting to realize this world is a lot more complicated than a single loyalty can account for." The queen's lips curved into something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. "A wise observation," she said. "More wise than most warriors ever manage, in my experience." She turned back toward the window, gazing out at the arena below. "The ancient law I mentioned to you weeks ago, the one concerning champions claimed by the crown itself, is no longer merely theoretical, Ethan Cole. Your victories have made it very real indeed." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, my earlier unease returning in full force. "It means," the queen said, still facing the window, "that the council will soon convene to determine your formal status within this empire. And it means that I, as much as my daughter, now have a claim upon your service that cannot simply be dismissed." She turned to face me fully once more, her expression unreadable, layered with something that felt dangerously close to genuine interest rather than mere political calculation. "The question, human, is what you intend to do about that." I stood there, wounds still aching beneath fresh bandages, staring at a woman who ruled an empire spanning a dozen worlds, and realized with growing certainty that the true battle ahead of me had very little to do with blades and arenas, and everything to do with navigating a conflict between mother and daughter that I had somehow become the center of, without ever choosing to be. "I don't know yet," I admitted honestly. "Then I suggest you decide quickly," the queen said, her voice carrying the faintest edge of warning beneath its calm surface. "Because others on this world are already deciding for you, and not all of their intentions are as generous as mine." The queen's warning proved true faster than I expected. Barely a week after our private conversation, word reached the palace that a group of noble houses, still furious over their defeat in the arena, had begun plotting something far more dangerous than another formal trial. Illyra told me the news herself, her face pale with barely controlled anger as she paced the length of her chamber. "They call themselves the coalition of the old bloodlines," she said. "Houses who believe the throne should never have been open to challenge in the first place, who see my claim and your involvement in securing it as an insult to tradition itself. "And they're planning what, exactly?" I asked. "An ambush," she said flatly, "disguised as a hunting expedition. They intend to invite you under the pretense of honoring your victory, then eliminate you far from the palace, where no witnesses can confirm what truly happened." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "And you know this, how?" "I have allies within their ranks who do not share their methods, even if they share some of their concerns," Illyra said. "But Ethan, this changes everything. If they succeed, my claim collapses instantly. Without you, I have no champion, no proof of strength, nothing to silence those who still whisper that I am too weak to rule." Before I could respond, a familiar presence made itself known at the chamber door. The queen entered without announcement, her expression grave in a way I had not seen before, none of her usual careful composure visible on her face. "I have heard the same reports," she said, "and I believe them to be accurate." "Then we cancel the expedition," I said immediately. "Simple as that." "It is not that simple," the queen said. "Refusing their invitation outright would be seen as an admission of fear, further fuel for their claims that my daughter's champion is not as formidable as the arena suggested. No, Ethan Cole, the invitation must be accepted, but it will not be accepted blindly." Over the following days, a plan began to take shape, one that involved careful coordination between Illyra's trusted allies, a handful of guards loyal directly to the queen, and myself as the deliberate bait at the center of it all. I did not love the idea of walking directly into a planned trap, but I understood the political necessity behind it, even if every instinct I had screamed against it. The morning of the hunting expedition arrived clear and cold, the copper-tinted sky from weeks earlier replaced by something closer to pale silver. I rode out with a small group of nobles from the coalition, their smiles polite, and their eyes calculating, clearly convinced that today would finally settle the matter of the strange human champion permanently. We traveled for hours into dense forest land surrounding the palace, terrain thick with towering trees whose bark shimmered faintly silver in the light. I stayed alert the entire time, cataloging every member of our group, every weapon visible and likely hidden, every subtle shift in conversation that hinted at the true purpose behind this expedition. The ambush came exactly where Illyra's information had suggested it would, in a narrow clearing surrounded by dense tree line that offered perfect cover for hidden attackers. The moment our small group reached the clearing, the polite masks dropped entirely. Weapons appeared from beneath cloaks, and the nobles who had smiled at me only hours earlier now regarded me with open hostility. "Nothing personal, human," one of them said, drawing a curved blade, similar to the one I had used in my very first arena fight. "But you represent everything wrong with allowing outsiders to disrupt tradition." "Funny," I said, drawing my own weapon and shifting into a defensive stance. "I was under the impression tradition on this world was decided by combat, not ambush." His expression darkened, but before he could respond, chaos erupted around the clearing. Illyra's hidden allies emerged from the tree line exactly as planned, engaging the coalition's additional hidden fighters before they could fully surround me. What had been designed as a simple, one-sided elimination instead became a genuine, chaotic battle. I fought harder than I had in any arena trial, because this time there were no rules, no formal boundaries, no herald calling an end to hostilities once honor had been satisfied. This was survival in its rawest form, and every lesson I had learned across weeks of trials suddenly mattered more than ever. I do not remember every individual moment of that fight clearly. I remember the burning exhaustion in my arms as I parried strike after strike. I remember the sharp, sudden pain of a blade catching my side, shallow but distracting enough to nearly cost me everything in the next exchange. I remember shouting Illyra's allies' names, coordinating movements instinctively despite our limited shared vocabulary, working together in ways that felt almost natural despite everything. And then, just as exhaustion began genuinely threatening to overwhelm me, just as the coalition's numbers began to feel truly insurmountable, The sound of heavy wings filled the clearing, and shadows swept overhead. The Queen's personal guard descended from above, riding massive winged creatures I had only glimpsed briefly during my time at the palace. Weapons already drawn, formation already tightening around the chaotic battlefield below. At their center, descending last, and with far more control than the situation seemed to warrant, was the Queen herself. She did not simply oversee the intervention from a safe distance. She fought alongside her guard, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace that made it immediately clear exactly how she had held her throne for as long as she had. The coalition's remaining fighters, already exhausted from the earlier chaos, stood little chance against reinforcements of that caliber. Within minutes, the ambush that had been carefully planned across weeks collapsed entirely. Surviving members of the coalition were disarmed and restrained, their earlier confidence replaced by grim understanding of the consequences awaiting them. I stood in the center of the clearing, breathing hard, blood soaking through torn fabric along my side, watching the Queen approach with an expression I still could not fully read. "You are injured," she said, her voice carrying none of the formal distance I had grown accustomed to. "I've had worse," I said, though my legs felt considerably less steady than my voice suggested. She studied the wound along my side with obvious concern, before signaling one of her healers forward. "You fought well," she said, "but you should not have needed to fight at all. This ambush was a direct violation of formal challenge protocols, and it will be answered accordingly." Alira arrived moments later, having fought her own way through the chaos alongside her allies, relief and fury warring openly across her face as she took in the scene before her. "They tried to have you killed," she said, gripping my arm as the healer began tending my wound. "Openly, without honor, without challenge." "They failed," I said simply. "Because my mother intervened," Alira said, glancing toward the Queen with an expression I could not quite categorize, gratitude and something more complicated tangled together. The Queen met her daughter's gaze evenly. "Because I refuse to allow cowardice to undo what strength has rightfully earned," she said. "Whatever complications lie ahead regarding this human status, I will not permit traitors to resolve them through ambush and murder." The journey back to the palace was quiet, tension still humming beneath the surface despite the successful outcome. I rode beside Alira, my wound bandaged tightly enough to manage the pain, my mind still processing exactly how close today had come to ending everything. It was that evening, once I had been properly treated by the palace healers and finally allowed to rest, that the true weight of the day's events settled fully upon me. I lay in the quiet of my chamber, staring at the strange, unfamiliar ceiling above me, replaying every moment of the ambush, every desperate exchange, every second where survival had felt genuinely uncertain. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I expected Alira, given the hour, but instead found the Queen standing in my doorway, dressed simply, without the formal robes or elevated presence she typically carried. For the first time since I had met her, she looked almost tired, almost human in her exhaustion. "May I enter?" she asked, a courtesy I had not expected from someone who held absolute authority over an empire spanning a dozen worlds. "Of course," I said, sitting up carefully despite the ache in my side. She entered and settled into the chair beside my bed, silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "Today, I very nearly lost something I did not fully realize I valued until the moment felt genuinely at risk," she said quietly. "The stability of your daughter's claim to the throne?" I asked, though something in her tone suggested the answer might be more complicated than that. "Perhaps," she said, "or perhaps something else entirely." She met my eyes directly, amber meeting whatever color mine appeared to her. "You saved my daughter's future today, Ethan Cole, simply by surviving, and in turn, I find myself questioning exactly what role I wish you to hold, moving forward." "The ancient law," I said slowly, remembering our earlier conversation, the one about the crown claiming a champion. "Yes," she said, "the council convenes in 3 days to formally determine your status. My daughter believes the outcome should favor her claim entirely." But I am no longer certain I agree. She rose from the chair, movements deliberate, measured. Rest now. You have earned it today. But know that the coming days will require decisions from you that carry weight far beyond any arena trial you have yet faced. She left as quietly as she had arrived, leaving me alone with wounds still healing and a mind racing with questions I did not yet have answers for. Somewhere beyond my chamber walls, I knew Alira was likely awake as well, processing the same uncertain future, wondering, as I was, exactly how the coming council would reshape everything that had brought us this far. I did not sleep easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments of the day's chaos. Blades flashing, allies fighting desperately beside me, the terrifying grace of the Queen's intervention descending from the sky at exactly the moment all hope seemed lost. And beneath all of it, quieter but persistent, I felt the growing certainty that whatever decision the Council reached in 3 days, my life on this world was about to change in ways I could not yet fully imagine. The 3 days before the Council convened passed slower than any stretch of time I had experienced since crashing on this world. My wound healed steadily under the care of the palace healers, but the deeper tension, the uncertainty hanging over my future, refused to fade with the same ease. Alira visited often during those days, though our conversations felt different now, weighed down by things neither of us said directly. She spoke of the Council's coming decision with obvious anxiety, outlining the political consequences of every possible outcome, the noble houses likely to support her claim, the ones likely to oppose it regardless of what was decided. "If the Council rules that you belong solely to me," she said one afternoon, sitting beside my bed as sunlight filtered through the tall windows of my chamber, "it strengthens my position enormously. It confirms that my claim to the throne carries legitimate, undeniable strength behind it. And if they rule differently?" I asked. Her expression tightened. "Then everything becomes far more complicated. My mother has never openly challenged my succession before, but the ancient law regarding claimed champions has rarely been invoked in living memory, precisely because it carries such significant political weight. If she chooses to invoke it fully, it could be interpreted as a statement about my capability to rule at all." "Do you think that's what she wants?" I asked. "To undermine you?" Alira hesitated, genuine uncertainty crossing her face for the first time since I had met her. "I do not know anymore," she admitted quietly. "My mother has always been difficult to read, even for those closest to her. She protected you during the ambush without hesitation, but protection and possession are not always the same thing, Ethan." I did not have a good answer for that, mostly because I was still working through the same uncertainty myself. The Queen's late-night visit to my chamber after the ambush had left an impression I could not easily dismiss, a glimpse of something more complicated beneath her carefully maintained authority. The morning of the council session arrived, with the same pale silver sky that had hung over the forest during the ambush, an uncomfortable reminder of how close everything had come to ending differently. I dressed in formal attire provided by palace servants, simple but clearly meant to convey respect for the gravity of the occasion, and made my way toward the Grand Council chamber alongside a formal escort. The chamber itself was unlike anything I had seen elsewhere in the palace, circular in shape, with tiered seating rising on all sides to accommodate representatives from every noble house across the empire. At the center stood a raised platform where I was instructed to stand, alone, while the assembled council determined my fate through means I still did not fully understand. Alira sat among the royal seating, her expression carefully composed, despite the tension I knew she carried beneath the surface. The Queen occupied the highest seat, elevated above even the council representatives, watching the proceedings with the same unreadable calm she always maintained in public settings. A herald began the formal proceedings, outlining the ancient law in language dense with tradition and precedent, explaining how champions who achieved sufficient victories on behalf of a royal claimant could, under specific circumstances, become bound to the throne itself rather than remaining solely tied to the royal they had originally served. The The specifics were complicated, layered with centuries of precedent I could not fully follow, but the core question at the heart of the proceedings was simple enough to understand. Would I remain solely bound to Alira's service, strengthening her claim to succession, or would the ancient law be invoked in its fuller form, binding me instead, or additionally, to the crown itself, meaning the queen? Representatives from various noble houses rose to speak, offering opinions shaped heavily by their own political interests. Some argued strongly in favor of confirming my bond to Alira alone, framing it as the clearest, simplest resolution that would settle the succession question definitively. Others, particularly those aligned with the surviving remnants of the coalition, argued in favor of invoking the fuller ancient law, though their motivations felt transparently aimed at complicating Alira's path to the throne, rather than any genuine reverence for tradition. Through it all, the queen remained silent, listening without visible reaction, until finally, as the debate began to circle without clear resolution, she rose from her elevated seat. The chamber fell silent instantly. "I have listened carefully to every argument presented today," she said, her voice carrying easily across the circular space, without need for amplification. "And I find myself troubled by how easily this council reduces a living being to a mere political instrument, debated and divided, without ever once considering his own perspective on the matter." Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives at that, clearly unexpected. Alira's expression shifted from careful composure to genuine surprise. "Ethan Cole," the queen continued, turning to face me directly, "you have fought valiantly on behalf of my daughter's claim. You have survived trials designed to break far stronger warriors than yourself. You have endured betrayal and ambush without wavering. I believe, before this council renders any formal decision, you deserve the opportunity to speak for yourself." I had not expected to be given a voice in these proceedings at all, and for a moment, I simply stood there, processing the unexpected weight of the opportunity now placed before me. Every noble in that chamber watched me with sharp, calculating attention, and somewhere among them, I could feel Alira's gaze, tense and uncertain, waiting to hear what I would say. I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment, the crash that stranded me here, the first terrifying fight in the arena, the growing trust between myself and Alira, built across weeks of shared danger, the strange, complicated intensity of my conversations with the queen, conversations that had left me questioning assumptions I had not even realized I was making. "I didn't choose to come to this world," I said finally, my voice steady despite the pressure of the moment. "I didn't choose to be thrown into an arena or dragged into a fight over succession that has nothing to do with where I came from. But somewhere along the way, I stopped simply surviving and started genuinely caring about the outcome. I glanced toward Alira. I fought for you because you needed someone who could survive impossible odds, and because over time, I came to respect exactly who you are, not just what you represent politically." I turned toward the queen. "And I fought through the ambush, survived everything this world has thrown at me, in part because of something I still don't fully understand, a pull I feel toward understanding you as well, not simply as a ruler weighing political advantage, but as someone genuinely trying to protect what matters to her, even when that protection looks complicated from the outside." The chamber remained utterly silent as I spoke, every representative straining to interpret exactly what I was saying, exactly where my loyalty ultimately rested. "I don't think loyalty has to be simple," I continued. "I don't think it has to belong entirely to one person, especially not on a world where the lines between duty and family and power are so tightly woven together. If this council decides I belong to Alira alone, I will continue fighting for her without hesitation. If this council decides differently, invoking whatever ancient claim exists over the crown itself, I will not resist that outcome either, but I want it understood, clearly, before any decision is made, that my respect for both of you is genuine, not simply the product of political circumstance." I finished speaking and stood in the silence that followed, uncertain whether my words had helped or complicated the proceedings further. The queen studied me for a long moment, something unreadable shifting behind her amber eyes, before finally turning back toward the assembled council. "You have heard him speak honestly," she said, "and I will now speak with equal honesty." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts carefully before continuing. "When I first learned of the ancient law regarding claimed champions, I considered invoking it purely as a political tool, a means of ensuring stability regardless of how the succession question ultimately resolved. But in the weeks since, I have come to see this human as considerably more than a political instrument." She looked toward Illyra, her expression softening in a way I had rarely witnessed. "My daughter has grown remarkably during these trials, proving herself capable of leadership in ways that silence any reasonable doubt about her fitness to rule. I will not diminish that growth by claiming her champion purely to serve my own political interests." Relief flickered visibly across Illyra's face, though something in the Queen's tone suggested the resolution was not yet fully complete. "However," the Queen continued, "I will also not pretend that my interest in this human's continued presence within our court is purely political. The ancient law exists precisely to account for circumstances such as this, where loyalty and respect extend genuinely beyond a single bond." She turned back toward me. "I propose, before this council, a resolution that honors both truths, Ethan Cole's formal service and the political weight it carries regarding succession remains bound to my daughter, confirming her claim to the throne beyond any reasonable challenge. But I ask this council to also recognize a separate, personal bond, one not tied to succession or political advantage, but to my own genuine regard for this remarkable stranger who has proven himself far beyond anything any of us anticipated when he first crashed upon our world." The chamber erupted into murmurs, representatives turning to each other in visible surprise at the unprecedented nature of the proposal. I stood on that raised platform, heart pounding, trying to process exactly what the Queen was suggesting and what it meant for the complicated, unfamiliar feelings I had been wrestling with for weeks. Illyra rose from her seat, and for a moment I feared genuine conflict was about to erupt between mother and daughter before the entire assembled council, but instead she simply nodded, slowly, her expression a complicated mixture of relief and quiet understanding. "I accept my mother's proposal," Illyra said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. "Ethan fought for my claim, and that claim now stands secure because of his courage. I will not begrudge him or my mother whatever bond exists beyond that service. He deserves the freedom to choose his own path forward, just as I have fought for the freedom to choose mine." The council deliberated briefly after that, though the outcome felt largely settled given the unified position offered by both Illyra and the Queen. By the time the herald formally announced the resolution, confirming Illyra's claim to the throne while acknowledging a separate, personal bond between myself and the Queen, the tension that had gripped the chamber throughout the morning had finally begun to ease. In the days that followed, life within the palace settled into something resembling a new, stable rhythm. Illyra's succession, now confirmed beyond any reasonable challenge, allowed her to begin the difficult work of consolidating her rule, addressing the lingering resentment among coalition sympathizers, and slowly reshaping the political landscape of the empire she would eventually inherit fully. I remained close to her during that transition, offering support wherever I could, grateful for the genuine friendship that had formed between us despite everything. But my evenings increasingly belonged to the Queen, conversations that had once carried the careful weight of political calculation gradually softening into something more genuine, more comfortable. We spoke of Earth, of the empire she ruled, of the strange, unlikely path that had brought a stranded human soldier into the center of an alien succession crisis. She was, I came to understand, far more complicated than the calculating ruler I had first encountered, layered with genuine care hidden carefully beneath decades of necessary political armor. I will not pretend the path ahead felt simple or fully resolved. An empire spanning a dozen worlds does not reshape itself easily around one stranded human, regardless of how many trials he survives or how much genuine respect he earns along the way. There would be further challenges, further political complications, further moments where the lines between duty and genuine connection would need careful navigation. But standing on the balcony of the Queen's private chambers one evening, watching the strange, beautiful sky of a world I had never expected to call home, I found myself thinking not of the ship I had lost, or the life I had left behind on Earth, but of everything I had gained instead, a princess who had become a true friend, a queen whose genuine regard for me had reshaped an entire empire's understanding of ancient law, and a strange, unexpected sense of belonging on a world that had once seemed impossibly foreign. I had fought for the princess because circumstance demanded it, and along the way, genuine loyalty had grown from that necessity. Now the queen had claimed something different from me entirely, not through force or political maneuvering, but through the slow, undeniable pull of genuine connection built across weeks of shared danger and honest conversation. Whatever challenges awaited on this world, I no longer faced them as a stranded stranger, fighting simply to survive. I faced them as someone who had found, against every impossible odd, a genuine place among the stars, bound not by chains or ancient law alone, but by choices I had made freely, one impossible trial at a time. And as the copper light of another strange sunset spread across the horizon, I understood, with quiet certainty, that whatever came next, I was finally, truly, exactly where I was meant to be.